Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is hike. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you're likely to hear hike used is to mean to go for an extended walk, and the purpose of this extended walk is for fun or for exercise, and you're generally doing it in a natural setting. I just returned from a vacation, had a lovely time in Canada, and this is a particular action that I did almost every day of our trip. We went on these extended walks out in nature. And I very much think they are for fun. But something that made me think of this as being a good verb to discuss is that I heard someone say on the trip, what's the difference between a walk and a hike? And the way most people use it deals a little bit with the length of time and what kind of surface you are on. So if you are going a very short distance, or maybe you are on a paved surface, so like concrete, asphalt, something of that nature, then you can use the verb walk. But if you are more on grass and things tend to be a little hilly, maybe up and down, maybe there are tree roots or other things you kind of have to navigate around, then hike is a better or more descriptive verb that you can use for this particular action. And I'm going to share some photos and a few example sentences related to my trip just a little bit later. A second way you'll hear the verb hike used is to refer to increasing something sharply or very quickly. And most commonly, this gets used to talk about prices increasing very quickly or sharply. A third way you'll hear the verb hike used is in the sport of American football. Okay, so not international football, but American football. We'll use this verb to refer to the action that begins a play. So another sort of related word you might hear is snap, but it's when the center passes the ball, generally to a quarterback, kind of through their legs. You should know that hike is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, all I need to do is drop the E and add ing to form hiking. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding the letter D, since this verb already ends in an E. Our base verb, hike, ends in an unvoiced K sound. So our past tense ending is going to make a T sound. It should sound like this: hiked, hiked. Now, there's one phrasal verb for us to look at, and that is to hike up. And I should note that sometimes people will use this followed by a hill, a cliff, a mountain, right, to refer going upward while walking through nature. But I've got a couple other meanings here. So another way we'll hear hike up used is to refer to pulling or lifting something up. And most commonly, you're going to hear people use it to refer to clothing. So an example here: hike up your pants before you go into the flooded basement. Okay, so this is an imperative, a command. Someone is telling them to sort of lift up the bottom of your pants so that they don't get wet in the flooded basement. As I took my trip, I know there were, unfortunately, a lot of people affected by flooding in different parts of the country. So I think Las Vegas and St. Louis, Eastern Kentucky had horrific flooding. So I hope my viewers are not in that area. I hope you are all safe and well. But I'm certainly thinking about those who have been affected by flooding. A second way you'll hear hike up used is to mean to increase. An example of this: did your building hike up rent this year? Right, so they're asking, was there an increase? Now let's continue using our verb of the day, hike, in a couple different verb tenses. Today we're going to practice the simple past tense and the present perfect. We'll start with the simple past tense. We use this verb tense to describe an action that was completed at some known point in the past. Many times in these sentences, there are time signals, words like yesterday or last month or a specific date in the past. But it doesn't have to be in every single sentence. Sometimes it's implied as part of conversation. Okay. So the thing you should know, though, about the simple past tense is that our structure is going to be the same no matter what the subject is. So in the affirmative, we're going to have our subject, and then we're going to have that ed form of the verb since this is a regular verb. Here's an example. Last week, we hiked on a glacier in Alberta. This is a true sentence. I shared with you earlier, I've been thinking of this verb on my vacation, and I've included a little photo down in the bottom left here of my husband and myself on a glacier in Alberta, Canada. So we did this long walk out in nature. We didn't go all the way to the top, but we made it pretty far. And just to give you a little bit of context, this is close to the bottom where we started. Here you can see lots of rock. So here we didn't have this nice paved surface. We had to walk on some difficult terrain. We also had special sort of tools on our shoes to help us have a grip on the ice as well. So I'll use my cursor to point out we did not go all the way to the top. It really might not seem that far. We went about here, I think, on the glacier, and we spent 3 hours or a little more actually out walking in nature. So again, that's why I'm using this verb hike to describe our action. If I want to make a negative simple past tense sentence, my structure again here will be subject, did not, and then the base verb. You can see that in the example here. Thankfully, the landlord didn't hike our rent last year. We can ask yes or no questions in the simple past tense. We start with did, then we have our subject, and then the base verb. So notice, no ed in the negative or our yes or no questions. Here's another example. Did you hike while on vacation this summer? So I'd love for you to make a comment if you took a trip and engaged in this activity or in this action. I'd love to hear where you hiked, or maybe you have a recommendation for a place I could go hiking. I would love that. Now, though, let's move on to the present perfect. So in the present perfect, we can also describe an action that occurred in the past, but what's different here is that it's at an unknown point, right? So we don't know. Was it yesterday? Was it 10 years ago? And it might not matter. That's okay. We also use the present perfect to describe an action that started in the past and continues into the present. In the present perfect, we do need to pay attention to our subject. Okay? And our verb is going to be made of 2 parts, but if our subject is I, you, we, or they, then I'm going to use have and then the ed form of the verb. Okay? Which is our participle in this case because we have a regular verb. If my subject is he, she, or it, I'm going to use has and then that participle form of the verb. Let's take a look at an example. I have hiked in Sweden and Norway. Okay, another true statement. I've got a picture here for you to see. Again, my husband and our friend Wilhelm are at the top of a very high point in Sweden in this particular photo. But as I describe this, you have no idea when it occurred, and that's okay. Maybe that's not the purpose. Maybe we're just talking about places where we have hiked, right? And so I could say, oh, Sweden and Norway would also be in addition to Canada. Now, if I want to make a negative sentence in the present perfect, my structure will be to start with my subject, right? I've got to pay attention to that, and then have or has, whichever form matches my subject, then not, and then that participle form of the verb. Here's an example. She hasn't hiked in South America. Okay, so we're kind of talking about going back in time up until this point. This action has not occurred. Finally, we can ask yes or no questions. To do this, we would start with have or has, depending on what our subject is, and that subject comes next. Then we use the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Have you hiked before? Now, remember, in our definition, we said many times this is for fun or pleasure. It's for exercise. So I know not everybody enjoys this particular action, and that's okay if you don't. So if you want to say, no, I haven't, and I have no plans to, that's okay, no problem. But it is something I really enjoy doing, and breathing fresh air and seeing really beautiful natural sights. Now let's spend a moment looking at a couple words and a phrase related to our verb hike. And the first word we'll look at is just the noun form of this word. So same spelling, same pronunciation. When I use hike as a noun, though, I could be referring to a long walk, particularly if it's in a natural setting. So the country, the wilderness, something like that. So you might say to a friend, let's go for a hike this weekend. Right? I can tell hike here is being used as a noun because I have the article a in front of it. I can also see the verb go, but that would be an example of a noun. The noun form hike also gets used a bit informally, just to mean anything that's a very long distance. So it can change based on our perspectives, but you might hear someone say something like, oh, it's such a hike to the parking lot, right? And so here what they mean is it is a long distance. The noun hike can also refer to a sharp increase in price. Here's another example. Have you noticed many price hikes? So, have you noticed prices increasing? And finally, like our third definition of the verb hike, hike can also be a noun referring to the snap in American football. So, an example of this. The quarterback tripped as he took the hike. Now, I'm not a huge American football fan. I actually stopped watching a few years ago, but I will share with you, I think it's more common to hear people use snap as a noun. So if you happen to want to fit in and have conversations about American football, I might use snap versus hike, but people will understand you no matter which one you use. Our next word is hiker. It's also a noun, and hopefully that er suffix is telling you this is a person or someone who hikes, who takes long walks outdoors. An example of this. Have all the hikers returned to the cabin? Okay. And lastly, I'm going to leave you with the phrase take a hike. Many times this is used in the imperative as a command, and it's a pretty strong negative command. So when we use it, we're telling someone to go away. We're telling them their presence in a particular place or space is not wanted, right? So we want them to leave or many times even just get away from us, okay? So if you said something like, why don't you take a hike? That might sound like a question. I've written it like that. But it's what we might call a rhetorical question. So we're not expecting someone to answer back. They should be able to take our hint. We want them to leave. Now, I will note, sometimes with friends, people will joke around and they might say, oh, take a hike, right? And they're just being silly, kind of, again, joking around, being playful. I would be careful using this phrase with a stranger, with a coworker, with someone I really don't know well. Again, because it can seem kind of harsh. Now, if you really want someone to get away from you and you don't care if they like you or not, feel free to use it. But thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.